From the heartland of America, it's the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf. Executive producer, David Stuckman.
Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolf. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 38 years. Actually, I think I just rolled over to 39 years earlier this month, so I'll have to change my intro. So, bail bondsmen, for better or for worse, have always had an association with the Old West, and I even have the hat to prove it. In fact, the first professional bail bond firm was founded in the 1890s in California following the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad and the resulting population and economic boom there. As cities became larger and populations more fluid, there was a need for the service. But this was really a decade or so after the heyday of the Old West. The gunfight at the OK Corral was in 1881, and many have described that event as the turning point up for the frontier, less lawlessness and more law enforcement. But still, the Old West was rich fodder for dime store novels or dime novels. I was even named after one of those novels. My copy even has 10 cents written on the cover. But even more than books, the film industry, coming into its own in the 20s and 30s, saw the Old West as uniquely American, rugged individualism, the lone gunman, good versus evil in the streets of Dodge City. And many, many bounty hunters were portrayed in the movies and TV shows. Have gun will travel, wanted dead or alive, for a few dollars more, and hang 'em high are just a few of the movie portrayals of Old West bounty hunters. And even though it's inaccurate, over time the connections to bail bonds is stuck. And while it's kind of cool to have that association, especially those of us old enough to have played cowboys and Indians growing up and even shot cap guns, and I really do like this hat, that association can have its negative side. When things go wrong, especially when it involves apprehending a fugitive, the media then describes the bondsmen as cowboys and decries that this shouldn't be the Old West or the Wild West. And of course, this response belies the fact that this is a regulated industry with licensing and education and oversight. My guest today knows all about that regulation. Lewis Garrison is the Director of Bail for the Oklahoma Insurance Department, the agency that regulates bail bondsmen in the state of Oklahoma. Lewis, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, hopefully with the Oklahoma connection, you were good with the Old West comparison there.
Yes, I was.
So before we get to what you do as Director of Bail, give us a little bit of background about yourself. I don't think most of us really ever imagined that we would be working in bail when we were younger. And unless you have a family history in bail, it's not the sort of thing you're like, hey, that's what I want to do. What was your path that led you into this line of work?
Well, I was in law enforcement for over 20 years. I was working at the Oklahoma Insurance Department in the anti-fraud unit, working insurance crime cases when I was approached and asked to be or consider taking over bail for because my predecessor was actually retiring and they were looking for somebody to step in. And they thought with my extensive criminal history or my criminal justice background that I would be a good choice for the position.
So I don't think most people really understand that there's a lot of insurance departments have a criminal division that specifically focuses on insurance fraud. That's not just the local police that are involved in that. So was that the sort of thing you were doing when you were there?
Yes, I was. That's what I was doing. I was working everything from property and casualty to life and health and various other aspects. We regulate, whether we were regulating consumers on consumer fraud or investigating different agents for doing things that were outside the scope of their position.
Okay. Well, I mean, when I was younger, my mother was a private detective and worked for Wackenhut or one of the big firms for a while. And so one of the things that they did was insurance fraud investigations. And I remember I was sitting in the back of our car with her when we were sitting on some, dusty country road, and we're filming some guy who's been over picking weeds and stuff out of his garden. But of course, he had made a claim and that he couldn't move and couldn't bend at the waist and all this other stuff. And so that was an insurance fraud thing. I don't know that you guys will be quite that granular on it, but are those the sorts of things, or?
No. We did a lot of things like when people manufactured hail claims, and we call it manufactured damage, where they'd take a ball peen hammer and bang up their car and try to claim that it was hail that got it. Those sort of things. Not so much workman's comp claims. Okay. I think maybe you're referring to more of a workman's comp, but we don't investigate the workman's comp side of the insurance industry.
So those sorts of complaints could come from either side, either the insurance company saying, hey, we think this is fraud, can you look at this? Or the client or the customer, potential customer saying, hey, my insurance company won't provide relief for this, and I think it's fraud, or that they're engaged in this. Those are the sorts of things that the fraud department would be investigating?
Yes, sir. That's exactly it.
So then, as director of bail, what exactly do you do, or what does your team do in there in the Oklahoma Department of Insurance or Insurance Department?
Well, we do everything bail. We do all the licensing. We approve or disapprove all the pre-licensing education, the continuing education side, the monthly reporting things that we take care of. We investigate any consumer complaints that we receive. So we do basically everything from A to Z in the bail industry, and we cover every aspect of the bail industry.
I recently, and we'll get into that in a little more detail. I recently was at a bail bond conference in Las Vegas, and I met a guy named John Cable, I think his name was, and he sort of had your job out of North Carolina. And in all honesty, most places where there's bail bond regulation, and there's some degree of regulation everywhere, but in most places it's the Department of Insurance that does that regulation. Sometimes it's the court system, sometimes it's the AG's office, but most often it's the insurance department. So, on people that are in your role, you and Mr. Cable, I mean, are there more of them around there? You guys communicate and kind of figure out how to best approach that?
Well, because every insurance department in the country is set up just a little bit differently than we are, we ultimately we do the same thing. We just go about it a different way. We have one division within the insurance department that solely, and this is the bail division, that we solely do everything, every aspect of bail. A lot of insurance companies, or a lot of insurance departments, they regulate bail. Some insurance departments do everything in their producer licensing side. They'll license them. Right. And then they segment out what we do all totally in-house in Oklahoma.
So, I mean, a lot of them wouldn't do like the monthly reports and the complaint stuff along those lines.
All within one division. Okay. Correct.
I understand. So how many bondsmen are there in Oklahoma that you get to be in charge of?
We fluctuate. We're a little over 500 right now. We've had as many as 615, 620, and we've had lows 480, but we usually ride just above 500.
Which seems like, population of Oklahoma is about 4 million, so it's what, 1.5 million, maybe more than Kansas. And I think we're in the 325, 350 range for bondsmen. So that's probably about the same ratio to population. Mm-hmm. So I did go onto the Oklahoma Insurance Department website, and so I'm really familiar with how Kansas works, because obviously that's where I am. But I saw that you have like 5 different lines of authority there, and some of them I'd like never heard of. I mean, you had the MCA, the multi-county agent authority, and so what are the different ways that you can justify or guarantee? Because I'm looking here: cash, multi-county agency or agent, professional, property, surety. What kind of explain the difference between all those different types of bondsmen?
Okay, we have just when a person comes into the industry, they start out as just basically a surety bail.
Okay.
And when they're in the industry, if they're going to put up their own cash for a bond and not use a surety, so to speak, then they have to get a cash line of authority. A professional is basically a surety that's a bondsman that they put up their own money on deposit with us. They generally have a 10-to-1 writing ratio, and they have different surety bondsmen that write under their line of authority.
Okay.
A multi-county agent was brought in basically because the way our statutes were written, you had to have, at one point in time, you only could write in one county, whatever that was your resident county. And so we created a line of authority, which was a multi-county agent that could have agents in multiple counties across the state of Oklahoma. In the past 4 years, I believe, we ran legislation as the insurance department, getting rid of the statute that only allowed bondsmen to write in the county that they were registered in. The thing that, it was the only license in the state of Oklahoma that you could hold a state license, but you were specifically limited to write in the one county. And what that was referred to, there was a 10 bond limit. So if you wrote in different counties, you could write a maximum of 10 bonds in that county. Well, I kind of felt like that was very restrictive, and I didn't like that. And I wanted to get rid of that 10 bond, what we referred to as the 10 bond rule. And because if you're a hairdresser, to me, it was like telling a hairdresser, okay, you're in Oklahoma County, but you can't go to Cleveland County and cut more than 10 heads of hair, or you'd be in violation of state statute. And every other state license was, and I felt like this industry deserved, if it was a state license, they should be able to do business in any county in the state of Oklahoma that they wanted to do.
Well, the 10 bond, obviously it's not there anymore, but so that was if you were trying to write a bond in a county that was not your base home county, because I would think it would be impossible to be in the bail bond business if you were limited to 10 bonds per year or whatever time period that was in. You're not really a working bondsman if those are all the bonds that you're posting.
Yeah, you could only post those. Now, in your home county, you could post as many as you wanted.
Okay, all right, I see.
But outside of your home county, if you had 4 counties around you, you could only write 10 bonds in each one of those counties.
Well, I think Oklahoma has larger counties than Kansas as far as just landmass wise. Because Kansas has 105 counties, but there's some counties there that have a population like 3,000 to 5,000 people, and you're not going to, if you have to be authorized in single counties, you're just going to have counties that don't have any service provided to them. So I don't know what the county size is there, but if you had a county in Oklahoma, maybe Panhandle or something like that, where there's only 10,000 people, it's going to be hard to justify even having a working bonding company there if they have to be based in that county.
Well, that's exactly right. We have 77 counties in the state of Oklahoma, and you get into the more rural or northwestern counties, and the population gets a lot thinner out there.
Right.
And there's a lot of people that can't make a living just solely living in one of those counties and having their own just one particular bonding company for that county.
Well, but then the people living in that county then won't have access to a bondsman either. Because it works both ways. You want to be able to have a bonding company be able to survive, but you also want to be able to have the people that live there have access to that service.
Correct.
The surety bond basically would be someone who's authorized through an insurance company. And then allows you to, even though you still have to have an insurance license to write bond, once you've been there, if you have a cash put up with the department and you can write on a multiple of that cash or something, you don't necessarily have to go through one of the national underwriters.
That's correct. And that's what our multi-county and professional, the difference between a multi-county designation and a professional designation is their ability to write. And a multi-county agent is 13-1 and a professional is 10-1. So a lot of the professionals will move to multi-county agents just because it gives them a greater writing ability based on their deposits.
And so if you were a surety writing for an insurance company, would you have any of those ratios, or is that just the company itself who works that out with the Department of Insurance?
No, it's in statute. A surety company, this is how the surety company basically is determined. The surety companies are granted a 20-1 writing ratio.
Okay.
So what we base that on, and to maintain that 20-1 writing ratio, they have to be within 5% of what the bondsmen report and what they report on total liability written that month. If they fall outside the like if they go 2 or 3 months in a row where they're broader than that 10%, then we move the surety company ability to write from 20-1 to 10-1.
And so does the insurance company have assets up in the state, or is that just based on their balance sheet? Through whatever their originating state is. I mean, whether it's South Dakota or California or wherever they're based out of.
Yes, they have their deposits directly with us.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's my understanding is that's somewhat unusual. I mean, most of the time, the insurance department, like in Kansas, there's no, and I don't think there are in Oklahoma, but there's no bail bond producers that are actually based in Kansas. I think the closest one is Sun Surety in South Dakota. But Kansas will simply rely upon whatever the South Dakota Department of Insurance is telling them about Sun Surety rather than requiring them to have something on deposit here. At least that's my understanding.
Well, your understanding is correct. But here in Oklahoma, we require them to have a deposit within the state of Oklahoma to protect the courts.
Okay.
Bail is protecting the courts. And I tell people this all the time. And sometimes people, well, how does bail work? How does bail work? Well, it works exactly like insurance does. We're insuring the court, but what the bondsman's insuring is that person is either going to appear in court or they're going to pay the bond amount to the court. And it works much like you going, because the bail bondsmen are really agents. Just like if you go have homeowners, you go to an insurance agent and they provide you a policy. And what bondsmen do is provide a policy that this person's either going to appear in court or we're going to pay. And if you have a hailstorm roll through and your roof is destroyed or whatever, and you need a roof put back on, what insurance does is they're going to pay for you to have a new roof or give you the money that is the amount of that roof for you to replace it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the one aspect of it that's different than that. In that, say you have a car wreck, your insurance company, they pay to have it fixed, but they don't get to go just take your car back and put it back in jail and go, okay, now we're good. We don't have to pay this. I mean, that whole the bounty aspect or the bringing them back in, in lieu of having to pay is one thing. It's a little bit different than most types of insurance that are there. I mean, there's that ability to cure the problem that's given to us.
Right, but it's still an insurance policy.
Right, exactly. So as the insurance, as the Department of Insurance, as the bail director, you guys, is it just enforcing bail bondsmen, or does the bail enforcement agents, or the loosely referred to bounty hunters, do those fall under your purview as well, or is that a different organization that regulates them?
No, we don't regulate the bounty hunters, which the Council of Law Enforcement Education and Training, also referred to as CLEAT,
okay,
in the state of Oklahoma, they regulate the bounty hunters. which the majority of the bounty hunters are actual licensed bondsmen as well.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Most of them carry dual licenses.
Right. Oh, really? So, I mean, even if you're a bondsman, you have to be licensed through CLEAT in order to go pick up your own people? Or
Not your own people.
Not your own people, but if you want to do it for anybody else.
Right, if you wanted to do it for somebody else.
Okay.
And as long as you're under the same surety, like, for example, if there's two bondsmen under the same surety, either bondsman could pick up another, they could bring somebody in as long as they're under the same surety.
So you like say American Surety, Roche, if you were an agent for that overarching company, even if you were separate agencies, you could pick up for each other as long as the underlying surety was the same insurance company?
That's correct.
Oh, well, that's handy. I know Kansas is a little looser than that. I mean, if you're approved as a bondsman, you can pick up for yourself or anybody else. If you're not approved as a bondsman, you have to get the bail enforcement agent's license to the AG's office. And Oklahoma also has, if I'm not mistaken, because I think Kansas maybe modeled off that, but they also have some restrictions on people coming in from out of state. They have to have someone local, either a bondsman with them or an authorized bail enforcement agent in the state in order to pick someone up. That's
correct. If they're a bounty hunter or a bondsman from another state, they have to enter into a contract with a bounty hunter within this state.
Yeah, I thought that because we introduced that several years ago in Kansas, and I thought we borrowed that. We've borrowed a lot of stuff from Oklahoma statutes, so it's been kind of given how much the approach you guys take to it, there's lots of stuff for us to pull from and go, hey man, this is a great idea right here. One of the things I did
That's
see
flattering. Thank you.
Kind of interesting was looking, and we can go through. You can walk me through, who can be a bondsman, how to go through all that. But I saw a deal that said that a bondsman can't own a liquor store or a bar, so they can't have a separate business in that. And that was kind of strange. Any idea what the background on that was?
That was long before this. This is my 9th year in bail, and that was long. That long preceded me. They were worried about people. I think the reason that they did that is they were worried about people that owned bars handing out and advertising theirs when they leave. Just call me if you get picked up and I'll bond you out type thing. We have revised many of those laws. When Oklahoma became a medical marijuana state,
I was wondering about that.
And they could hold. The decision was made that they could hold they could own dispensaries and be a bondsman. And so in the sense of fair play, I said, well, if you can sell marijuana from a dispensary, why can't you sell alcohol as well? So we went through and revised a lot of those statutes, and we still have a few more that we need to go ahead and eliminate. But to make it a complete playing field for everyone. And I just felt, in the sense of fair play, that's the reason why we took a lot of those statutes out.
Well, and there's a lot of bondsmen that, especially in more rural areas, that yes, they're bondsmen, but that might be 30% of the business that they do. And they have other businesses, and then they're available to do bonds when they need to, because like we talked about earlier, there's just not enough business to justify a full-time bondsman. I mean, I know we've got some in Kansas that are cattle ranchers and have other businesses that they're engaged in as well.
It was the same in Oklahoma. Exactly.
So if I wanted to be a bondsman in Oklahoma, what would the hoops I have to jump through? How would I go through to become a bondsman there in Oklahoma?
Well, the first thing you'd have to do is you'd have to be a resident of the state of Oklahoma at least for 1 year prior to making application. 2, you have to have at least a high school diploma or its equivalency. And then you have to attend a 16-hour pre-licensing school. And then once you do that, then you're eligible to apply.
And so then presumably you'd also then have to either find an insurance company that's willing to let you write for them, or, put up, your cash equivalent that would be on deposit with the insurance department as well.
Well, you can't be a professional in the state of Oklahoma and put your own cash up until you have been a bondsman at least for 2 years,
Okay.
a surety bondsman for at least 2 years.
So kind of like you can't be a real estate broker until you've been an agent for a while.
Correct.
Well,
And that's happened in the past. And so we learned our lesson, much like any other things. We've had people become bondsmen that had the money to put up and become a professional, and they really didn't know the industry well enough to do that, and it caused a lot of issues, so we changed the statute.
Now, one of the things that I saw was that you were presenting at the Oklahoma Bondsman Association's recent continuing education class. And one of the things I really did like was, the involvement there. Because I know some places, that the insurance department will come out and present it at the continuing education classes that the bond associations put on. We haven't seen anyone from Kansas for ages at any of ours. But what sort of message do you have for the people taking those classes? I mean, I saw that one of your slides was right is right and wrong is wrong. I didn't see the presentation. That was just kind of a carryover picture, the background from the Oklahoma Bail Association. What do you tell people when you teach at those classes?
Well, my message to the industry is we have to work and change our perception. For this industry to continue to grow and to work and to continue to thrive, we have to change the perception of what bail is in the state of Oklahoma. We have to be above reproach, and that's been my message, is that we need to improve our perception and how people perceive this industry, and that's what's been most important.
I definitely agree with that. I mean, if nothing else, just in presentation, which I know that I follow some other stuff. I know that Mississippi Bail Association has been hammering away at, hey, you need to behave and appear and conduct yourself like a professional.
Exactly. And I 100%, and that's been my message, when the slide that you saw that I was on, the hardest thing to do is to do the right thing, even when no one's looking. And that's the type of integrity that we have to have in this industry. And I solely believe that 1,000%.
Well, I mean, and the business is a privilege. I mean, it's not a right to be a bail bondsman. It's a privilege. And if you abuse those privileges, they're going to go away.
Oh, you're exactly right. And, and I tell pre-licensing, that I share this story with them regularly. I got into law enforcement in the early 1990s. And the thing is, through my career, I've seen the greatest pendulum, the law enforcement swing conservative to less conservative, more so during my career than in most people's career. And you think about all the things that have happened throughout, my career in law enforcement and bail, and how it's moved the pendulum more to the left, farther away from the right. You talk about all these major news instances that happen. When I started law enforcement, I could go in and raise my right hand and stand before a magistrate and said, this person did this, and that's all it took. Now, all the cops wear body cams. You have to prove all of these things that you said the defendant that did this, and it's no more of an industry of integrity. It's more of, here's my proof on how this person did this. And it's moved so far one direction, even though it's starting to move a little bit back more towards the right now than what it once was. It's still about integrity. And that's what I preach. And that's doing the right thing, even when no one else is watching.
Yeah, the body camera thing, you know, the argument for that was always, look, these cops are bad and we're going to catch them being bad if they have these body cameras on. And, the police are like, oh my God, they're going to, get me, scratching my leg or something like that instead of, doing what I'm supposed to do. And so police didn't like that initially. And then it really turned to, hey, this is one of the greatest tools we've ever gotten. One,
exactly.
It proved that we weren't doing all these bad things that people were saying, because if that was our default position, it would show up on those cameras. And then it also turned into this tool to make convictions because people just confessed to stuff right there on the camera.
And exactly. And, and always, the industry, I've explained in my motto, it's 2%. 2% of the cops create 99% of the laws. 2% of doctors create tons and tons and tons of claims on malpractice. Right. It's 2% in every single industry. And, when I try, and one thing that you'll hear me say once, don't be a 2%er. Do the right thing even when no one else is watching. And it's not only bail, it's every industry across this country that those 2% create problems for every industry in the entire country.
Oh, sure. And then when you try and say, hey, that's just one or two bad apples, wow, that, they don't really buy that, even though they see it in their own professions and they know that that's the case, know. But if you have a position of power and authority and a position where there could be some abuse, at some point there's going to be some abuse. So there needs to be some mechanism to clap back against that abuse. And I assume that's one of the things, that in the enforcement of the complaint aspect of your job that you're doing as well.
That's exactly correct.
What sort of complaints does your office handle? I mean, maybe walk us through the complaint process. If somebody wants to complain about a bondsman, how does that get initiated? What do you do from there? How does that work?
Well, state statute says that I can't act on it. I can't create an investigation without having something in writing first. Okay. So what happens a lot of times is the consumers of the state of Oklahoma, which we try to educate, and we do education programs for all the judges. We teach at the judges conference. We teach at the court clerks conference. We teach at the district attorneys conference. We teach at the sheriff's association. They're meeting twice a year. So we try to get out and teach all these people and say, hey, listen, if you come across somebody that has a complaint, and we also try to teach consumers, which we have on our website that Commissioner Mulready is very proactive in. And what we do is we educate people. If you do have an issue or you do have a problem, just contact the insurance department. We regulate them. Well, they'll call and we'll provide them a written or a form that they fill out, and then they send it to us either via electronically or via the U.S. Postal Service, and we review the complaint to see if there's a violation of the bail bond code. And then at that point, we'll start doing that process.
So what sort of complaints do you normally get? I mean, I would assume that, just from my own experience, because I get this call at least once or twice a week. Well, I went to court, so when do I get my money back? It's like, well,
all the time, every day.
Exactly. And obviously that's not going to rise to the level of being some sort of complaint. But what are some of the other things that you've addressed in the past, without naming any names or anything like that, but the things that have actually resulted in action that we're going to try and avoid?
Well, complaints in Oklahoma are actually confidential by statute.
Okay.
But the majority of the complaints that we get is just what you said. People will call and say, hey, I went to court every single day, and now that I'm out, I want my premium back. And I'm like, listen, well, if you don't file an insurance claim after you pay your car insurance, they don't give you anything back. It's exactly the same way. So people get confused a little bit about that. But a lot of complaints that we get on bondsmen, sometimes, a lot of it's collateral. A lot of it is how they were treated, how they were talked to, those type those type of things. I gave them collateral for my bond, and they haven't given me my collateral back. And generally, they don't understand that there's a process involved there. If they've given him cash, that he has to go get the cash and get back. And usually it's 99% of those are miscommunication from the bondsman to the client, but are resolved pretty quickly.
I know that like Missouri Department of Insurance, in their complaint system, they use a pretty robust system of fines against the bondsman. You didn't file this piece of paper right, so here's a $300 fine. There's several different fines that they use hand in hand with both suspensions and revocations. So what's in your toolkit as far as enforcement? If you find that there has been some sort of violation, is it just straight out your revocation, or do you have an escalation of potential responses to that?
We have an escalation. Depending on the severity of the infraction, it could result in as little as a $250 fine. It goes up from there to suspension to revocation, depending on the severity of what the infraction was or how many infractions had occurred within that time frame of doing the same thing over and over and over. And then, of course, we escalate the amount of the fine depending on how many times that infraction has occurred. Then if it continues, and then we move to suspension or revocation.
Okay, so you've engaged in this behavior and you've been fined 3 or 4 times already. So now we're going to move to a suspension or a revocation or something like that.
It could potentially, yes.
So another thing that really has happened a lot and probably wouldn't necessarily fall into your favor, but it's these bail bond scams. There's so many online scams and so many internet scams, but since the jails are mostly all available online now, where you can see who's in custody, and of course we use that ourselves. Hey, this is our client, they're back in custody, and we're looking at. But so are scammers, and they're looking at these, and they're looking at the addresses, and they're getting on their computers, and they're crisscrossing, trying to find phone numbers and stuff to connect to, and they'll call the families and try and get them to send them some money, promising they'll get them out really quick and right away if you can, and they'll give you some lesser amount than the bondsman would charge. The other scam that gets done is, and we've had this happen to us a lot, and it's cyclical. It's like they'll come and hit your county really hard until everybody's like, whoa, 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 and you start telling everybody don't do this, but they will call the person that you've bonded out because they can see that you bonded that person out. They'll call and they'll spoof your phone, and it'll say Shane's Bail Bonds or ABC bonding or whatever on the phone. And then they'll say, well, there was a problem with your paperwork and you need to, wire us or go to Walmart and get a gift card or send us some crypto or whatever for $500. If not, we're going to come pick you up. And so then they call us an hour later and go, well, that you piece of, garbage, how dare you do this? I already paid you. And like, we don't know what you're talking about. But I don't know, what do those sorts of complaints rise to you, or does those go to law enforcement as just an additional crime?
Well, they do. A lot of people do call us directly on those type of complaints, and what we do is we refer those to the Oklahoma Attorney General's office, okay. And then they'll investigate them from that point forward. Matter of fact, it was just this morning the Oklahoma Attorney General just put out a bulletin about being on the watch out and be careful about these type of phone calls, and which is an effective way for us to get that message out to the citizens of the state of Oklahoma to try to protect them from these type of scams. One thing that I do regularly is I encourage our industry to get out into, because the world of bail sometimes gets behind a curtain. Bondsmen get behind a curtain because of the element that they work with. I encourage them to get involved in the little leagues, get involved in their communities, let people know who they are, so that people, the more they get out into the public and the more that they get involved with their civic organizations of their communities, the more people know them, they get to know them. In that way, those people that live in those communities where those bondsmen get involved, they get to know them, and they'll be less likely to fall victim to one of these scams.
Well, and that's just basic marketing as well. I mean, just from a business perspective, get involved in as many organizations as you can. Join the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, there was a reason why the Bad News Bears had Chico's bail bonds on the back of their shirts, because he was, in theory, out there. I mean, I know it's supposed to be something snarky about the movie, but still, you're sponsoring the Little League team. You're involved in that.
And I've used that as example on many occasions to try to get, to use that as an example to try to get bondsmen to get involved with these type of organizations, so people get to know them and see that they are great people and they're truly, not what they're perceived to be. And that in turn, my whole strategy for that was to change the perception of how these people, how our industry's perceived.
So another threat that I guess the bondsman would view as a threat, but it's another issue, is the issue of charitable bail. And I know that's made some inroads in Oklahoma. For a while there, the Bail Project, the organization called the Bail Project, was one of their big news stories was about an Oklahoma jail. And there's another group that's Team or something like that seems to be acting like a bail fund. So what are there was an article a couple of years ago in one of the television shows about that there was no regulation of charitable bail in Oklahoma. Has that changed at all? Did the legislature step in and do anything, or is that still sort of wide open?
That's still wide open. We don't, at the insurance department, we don't regulate any of the charitable bail organizations. We have an attorney general's opinion that came out several years ago. But we don't regulate any of the charitable bail organizations currently.
Because that seems like an example that you gave earlier was, a bondsman comes in, becomes a professional bondsman. He puts up his own money because he had the money to do that, and then got into problems. Without any background, because the part of the problem with the Bail Project and these charitable bail funds is there's the argument that, they want to help people get out, but they're trying to break down and damage the bail industry as a whole. I mean, that's in their mission statement on those things is, we want to be bail disruptors to try and get rid of bail to show that this doesn't work. Now, my understanding was, that these groups will come out and say they have a 92 or 93% appearance rate, themselves when you ask them. But then when some independent party like CNN or some television news or law enforcement in the area actually looks at those numbers, that failure to appear rate is markedly higher than, in the 40 to 50% range, which would seem like it would be right for some agency like yourself to be at least overseeing that to a certain extent. But so
we don't regulate anything to do with the charitable bails.
Right.
The bail part of it. And it's really hard for me to make a comment on that because we don't regulate any part of that. I don't know if and when that will change in the state of Oklahoma, but it will take, it's just really hard to say.
Well, we may be at the tail end of that particular attack on bail. I know here, just maybe within the last month, the Minnesota Freedom Fund, which was the charitable bail organization that Kamala Harris promoted during the George Floyd riots, just announced that they were no longer going to be posting bail. They collected $40 million or whatever it was from all those donations, and they still got involved. But they basically were bonding out people for violent crimes who went out and committed additional violent crimes. And so that was making them look bad. And I think it was impacting their bottom line. So they're backing out of the posting cash bond. So they're not going to be in the charitable bail business anymore, but they're going to be in the political advocacy area as far as arguing against bail. But apparently they're no longer going to provide that alternative to it. Now, you talked about how you'd gone in and made some changes to, different things like, allowing bondsmen to be involved in more than one business, that sort of thing. I remember a few years ago, there was legislation introduced, and it was bail reform legislation that would have severely limited bail in Oklahoma, a lot more signature bonds, a lot more release without bail. And probably some of that has occurred anyway, just generically. And that legislation didn't pass, but I'm curious if the Oklahoma Insurance Department takes any position on anti-bail legislation that gets introduced, or do you just take a hands-off approach to that?
When that, we had a different commissioner
Okay.
under our, we had a different commissioner under, you're referring to Senate Bill 252.
I will take your word for it. There's too many Senate bill numbers all over the country for me to keep track of them all.
And yes, it was one of the greatest things I think I saw from that time frame was I saw the industry come together. A lot of times the industry, they're such competitors with each other.
Sure.
But I saw a change in the industry that gave me so much hope and for the future of this industry in the state of Oklahoma as they banded together and they stood arm in arm and fought that all the way through. We didn't have anything to do with that fight at the insurance department, but I saw the industry come together, lock arm in arm, and fought that piece of legislation to the end. And the industry was very successful at killing it. And it was very monumental piece of legislation that they killed. The thing that gave me hope from that was seeing how they could come together and fight that battle together with no fighting amongst each other.
And sometimes that outside threat is what forces you to come in and go, okay, wait, we can't bicker amongst ourselves or we're going to lose everything. The one thing I have really liked, watching from across state lines at the Oklahoma Association, they haven't been static on their leadership. I think, wasn't Tracy Terrell, was she just elected as president of the association recently? And so there's been a change they've had multiple different presidents, and a lot of associations, you have one person at the top or, a couple people at the top, and they sort of, keep it going. It seems like they've been a lot more involvement. The more people have been involved, more people have taken leadership roles in their association.
Yeah, and that's very true. And Tracy is the first female president of the Oklahoma Bondsman Association in history. She's truly ready for the task. She has stepped up. She has worked tirelessly on the education side. Her involvement of traveling around the country, going to all these different organizations, the different associations around the country, her involvement in PBUS, being a former Bondsman of the Year at PBUS, she's ready for the challenge, and I think she's going to do a great job.
Well, sounds like we might have another guest in the future then.
She would be a good one.
Now, I've met Tracy a couple of times at various things, and yeah, she's impressive. But I know that there was I don't remember who it was, but I think one of their vice presidents was a woman who came up and presented to us at the Kansas Bail Agents Association. So I've been impressed with their association, and just that it hasn't been, limited to one or two people, controlling things. And I know that other places like Missouri and I think even Mississippi have had groups break off from each other over personality disputes. And so now they have competing bail organizations, which I guess if they're both working towards the same goal is okay, but it doesn't seem to have the same force as one statewide association.
I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. And I receive phone calls from bondsmen regularly complaining about this or complaining about that. And I'm like, listen, if you have time to complain, you have time to get involved. If you don't like the way something's going, then get involved and change it. I don't control the Oklahoma Bondsman Association.
Right.
We partner with the Oklahoma Bondsman Association, work hand in hand with them generally on everything. And I don't listen to some of the nonsense that I get complaints about when they're referring to the Oklahoma Bondsman Association. I just simply tell them, and Tracy will be the first one to tell you that I encourage the industry to get involved. And if you don't like the direction that's going, then get involved and change it.
What are the big problems facing bail in Oklahoma, just in overall, just in sort of big picture? What's going on that's going to have a negative impact on the bonding industry, or the things that we could maybe change to make things better in Oklahoma? I saw. You did presentation and appearance and that sort of thing, but what else might be going on?
Well, I think for the most part, the industry is very solid, things are going pretty well. I think that the only thing that could ever change the industry in the state of Oklahoma would be self-inflicted wounds.
Right.
And, you know, as long as they continue to try to strive towards changing the perception of how people are perceived and how they're perceived in this industry, you know, if we ever slid back on that, that would be the only thing that really would hurt the industry as a whole in the state of Oklahoma. I think for the most part, though, it's very solid.
Well, one of the things I've noticed other places, and this kind of hopped up in Tennessee and was the impetus for some issues we had in Kansas here a couple of years ago, was this practice of discount bonding. And sort of that one of the arguments we've always made is, hey, you know, if you're writing bonds for an insurance company, you're supposed to have your fee schedule with the Department of Insurance, and in theory, you're supposed to follow that fee schedule. But you had areas, Tennessee is in a big issue on a constitutional amendment right now, where they're trying to basically allow the state to pretrial detain more people. And it's a pretty broad group of people that they can detain without bail altogether. And one of the arguments that they made for that, the people that were pushing that, was that there were a bunch of bondsmen, or at least probably 2% of bondsmen in Tennessee, that were doing bonds for 1% and 2% of the face amount of the bond, as opposed to the typical fee. And so the judges weren't able to make good decisions about what they wanted the bail to be, and you were getting people that the judges, for lack of a better term, wanted to stay in custody, which is why the bonds were set so high. But those people were getting out oftentimes on violent crimes and committing more violent crimes. I mean, that is a self-inflicted wound. But is that something that you see going on in Oklahoma at all? I mean, it kind of comes and goes. If you have an insurance company that drops 50 agents in an area, then suddenly they're all competing with each other. And, you know, one of the main ways that bonding companies compete with each other is on price. I mean, you can compete on appearance and advertising and service and everything else, but bottom line, you know, your biggest hammer is competing on price, but then you end up potentially getting, you know, the wrong people out.
Well, one of the things is we do not regulate premium in the state of Oklahoma.
Okay.
We don't tell bondsmen what or how to charge on their premium. Pretty much the industry standard is 10%
Right.
of the actual bond. Unless you know, the only time that that's ever really truly different is if you have a bondsman gets called from Oklahoma City and has to go out to the Panhandle and say, go to Beaver, Oklahoma. They may charge travel or charge this.
Right.
For the most part, the industry, they self-regulate on that a lot and try to maintain that 10. Now, we do run through the ebb and flows where somebody will come in and start charging 5 and 6%. Usually when that happens, there's other issues that are going on with that individual bondsman. And usually those type of situations kind of take care of themselves and wash themselves out, so to speak.
Right. The market sort of takes care of itself.
The market takes care of itself, and they generally have a lot of other issues that are underlying, and they have to have cash right now, and they start robbing Peter to pay Paul type things. And generally, those individual bondsmen that do participate in those type of activities usually fizzle themselves out of the industry.
Okay. So I know we're coming up on our hour here. So what, I know you've sort of touched on this before, but I'll give you one more chance here. What would be your main overarching message that you want to send to bail bondsmen? What would you like, you know, if you got to tell them all one thing, and maybe if it's the same thing, just go ahead and reiterate it, but what's your main message to the bonding industry?
My biggest message is, and bondsmen in Oklahoma hear me say this regularly, because another bondsman is your competitor does not make him your enemy, number one. Number two, simply do the right thing. If you do the right thing, everybody inherently knows deep down in their heart right from wrong. And if it's not the right thing, don't do it. and just continue and continue and continue to work on how your community and how where you live perceive you, and allow the simple perception of how people perceive you will make a huge change in this industry.
Wise words. I think that's good advice to everybody, no matter where they're working, whether in Oklahoma or any place else. The bonding industry has long had an image problem, and anything we can do to improve that is going to be plus, because we do good work. I mean, and it's important work. But if people only see your payday loan sign or whatever hanging out there, they're going to view you in a certain way.
You're exactly right, and that's the thing that I have tried to strive to change about our industry more than anything, because I think that will take care of a lot of the other issues that are out there.
Sounds like a plan. Well, Mr. Garrison, thank you very much for taking time to talk to us today. I really do appreciate it. We don't always get someone in this role here. It's refreshing. A lot of times when we're dealing with people in the government, it's people that are they're mad at us for whatever reason or wanting to change some stuff. I think I've got a meeting later on today where I've got to go sit in on a meeting that's not going to be nearly as friendly as this one. So I really appreciate taking the time to talk to us today.
My pleasure, and I feel very honored that you even asked me to do it. And thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you. We would like to thank our guest, Lewis Garrison, Director of Bail for the Oklahoma Insurance Department, for joining us on the podcast. Certainly sounds like he and his team are doing a great job of overseeing the bail bondsmen in Oklahoma. And it sounds like he's a real supporter of bail as well. If you're in the bail bond business, it's important that you maintain good relationships with whatever entity is regulating in your state. And Lewis has given us some insight about how Oklahoma works. Every state's going to be a little bit different. But we hope that you'll join us the next episode of the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we'll continue to bring you critical information and conversations with people involved in the criminal justice system. Thanks, guys.
Join us again next time for the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf and executive produced by David Stuckman.